What we're really doing today is telling the story that you'll encounter in John 5. Part of why we're doing it is you need to realize you can read the Bible this way. There is nothing that I'm going to do in teaching you today, either in what I've already said or what I'm about to say, that you can't do on your own. You just have to engage your imagination, pay attention to the details, and you will come to the same conclusions. And it will be just as powerful for you as you read. So let's return to that story, and we need to put attention on the character that we kind of flew past when we worked through the first half of the message. And that's the man who's there at the pools of Bethesda. Let me tell you this man's story, all of which we know from the verses we are given at the beginning of John 5. This is a man who had been ill for 38 years. We know from what's going to come that this illness or impairment has to do with his legs. He could have been born this way, or he could have had an accident as a young child that left him this way. And ancient medicine being what it was, there was no hope for him. He could have very simply, maybe as a young kid, running around like my own son or your daughter does, and broke a leg, and they didn't set it right. And therefore, for the rest of his life, he couldn't walk. It could be something that simple, a herniated disc, a problem with his spine. Maybe it's total paralysis. We don't know. We know he's had it for 38 years. And that tells us something else. In this day and time, that tells us what his life had been like as an adult. He either A, was a dependent on his family, meaning they had to care for him. He was an invalid in their midst. They worked their jobs, and in that day and time, most people were very poor. They worked hand-to-mouth jobs, had very little money, and so he was a dependent on them. And you know how that feels if you've ever been in that situation. So he felt like he was taking from them and they already had very little. If that is not what this man's story was, then here's the other thing that this guy spent his adult life doing. He was a beggar, which meant that that's probably why he was in Jerusalem. Lots of traffic in Jerusalem, big city in Jerusalem, and so he sat there at the pool or at the gate or by the temple, and he begged for his very living, decade after decade as an adult. And so he, like many infirmed or ill people of his day and time, had bought into the folklore about this warm spring at the pools of Bethesda. And he believed that if he could get in the water, then he could be better. Here's the problem. Like I touched on before when we ran through these verses, the belief about these pools was the first one in gets healed. Everybody else is out of luck. And John is clear in retelling this story that this guy had no help. He didn't have an uncle or a cousin or a brother who was with him at the pool. He was all by his lonesome on his mat there waiting at the pool at Bethesda. So imagine in your mind what transpired every time the waters bubbled or were stirred up, and every sick person there is trying to get into the water first. Can you see it in your mind's eye? It's not hard to imagine. Can you imagine what this guy had to go through? There he is, maybe 20 feet from Poolside. He can't walk, and he has no help. So he's clawing with his hands, dragging his dead legs behind him to get into the water. And time after time after time after time, he's too slow because of his handicap, because of his illness. Maybe one time he gets ever so close, and he just can't get there, and his heart breaks. And it is at this point in this story that it is hard not to cry for this man. Right? Do you get it? Do you see it? This man had dealt with this his entire adult life, and he had no hope. He was helpless to do anything about it. How at some point did he just not stop and give up? Because somebody was going to be faster than him to get into the water. And so there he sits, distraught and desperate. The last vestiges of hope bleeding out of him every time somebody beats him into the water. And then Jesus shows up and changes his life forever. If you consider the miracle at the pools of Bethesda and what transpired in the life of this man who is central to the story, you might find yourself a lot like him or someone else you know, a neighbor of yours, someone in your family, a friend, a coworker. There are probably things in your life, and I don't know what they are, or in the life of somebody you love and care about, that right now you could identify have plagued you for years, decades even, like this man at the pools of Bethesda. And like this man at the pools of Bethesda, it seems like it's hopeless. You're helpless. You're powerless to do anything about it. Man, you've tried. You have clawed with your fingernails toward the pool, and you've just never been able to make it in on time. And so there you sit poolside, resigned to thinking that whatever it is never going to go away. And it is going to plague you the rest of your life. And then comes Jesus. And he can do for you what no one else can. Now here's the thing. I don't know what your thing is, or maybe it's not about you today, maybe it's about somebody you love or who's near you. I don't know what your thing is. And moreover, I can't tell you what Jesus is going to do about that thing or the timetable in which he's going to do it. Sometimes radical change takes a long time. Sometimes it happens immediately, like in this story. Here, however, is what you have to do. You have to back up one step. What was the one thing that could have happened that would have prevented the miracle at the pools of Bethesda? It would have been the infirmed man who had been dealing with this for 38 years, looking Jesus in the eye and telling him, you can't. You don't get it. I have dealt with this my entire life, and nothing is going to make me better. You can't. And in that minute, Jesus is rendered powerless. He can't help if you tell him that you don't think he can. So maybe today what you need to do for yourself or somebody else you know who fits into this kind of category is you need to stop telling God that he can't. And you just need to be open to allowing God to do what only he can. Take all your expectations off. I don't know how it will happen. I don't know when it will happen. That is up to him and his wisdom. But stop saying you can't. Here's what I want you to do. There's blue slips all over the place, on your chairs, at your tables. And on those blue slips are what you see up on the screen. I want you to think about something in your life or something in the life of somebody you care about, a neighbor, that fits these categories. Like what plagued the man at the pools of Bethesda. What is that thing for you or your neighbor? And I want you to write it down on that blue slip of paper. And then, as the worship team leads us in a last song, I want you to stand. And I want you to fold it. And I want you to come and put it in our little makeshift pool at Bethesda. And as you put it in the pool of Bethesda, you can tell God whatever you want about it. I am going to suggest to you the one thing you need to tell God about it is, I am no longer going to tell you that you can't about this. And I am open to you doing in this situation what to me seems impossible. So take a minute. As the worship team begins to lead this last song, take a minute and write it down. And then as you finish, we're not going to go by row, you just stand up and come up here as we're singing and put it in the pool at Bethesda. And tell God you're going to stop telling him that he can't. And that you're going to believe nothing is impossible for him, even if it seems that way to you. Okay? So why don't you take a minute